Hey guys, I'm Heidi Priebe, and today I'm making a video that I've been wanting to make for a really long time because in my videos lately, I have been recommending therapy left, right, and center, which is a little bit ironic for me because for the first 29 years of my life, so until this past year of my life, I found almost no value in therapy whatsoever. I had tried out therapy 4 different times, I think, over the course of my life, and I had never found it effective because I was not in the place where I was able to engage honestly and transparently with a therapist. Now, that is definitely not the only barrier to entry with therapy though. For a lot of people, therapy is actually completely inaccessible. If you don't have some sort of insurance that covers it, it can be extraordinarily expensive to find a good therapist. And it's also worth acknowledging that even if you do have therapy provided to you through your insurance or through your work, whatever it is, you might be limited in terms of which therapists are available to you, and you might not be able to find someone who either specializes in what you're struggling with or who you have rapport with. I'm going to make a follow-up video to this one that talks about how to find the right therapist, but that process might be difficult if you're limited in terms of which therapists you're able to go see. So this video is for both the people who cannot access therapy because there are real tangible barriers to it, or those who can't access therapy because mentally or emotionally you're not ready to do that yet. And I actually think that's something that we don't talk enough about. Like, I love that therapy is now normalized and everyone's answer to everything is go to therapy, see a therapist, and that's great. But there are also certain mental health challenges you might be having that make it difficult for you to open up in therapy and to engage honestly in therapy or to even know what to talk about in therapy, right? Like, if you're avoidantly attached, your sensitivities have been hidden from you for so long that you might sit in the therapy room and just be like, I feel fine. I'm having problems, but I don't really know how to connect them. And therapists can be good, but they cannot be miracle workers. We have to be ready to engage in therapy before it's going to work for us. But that doesn't mean that in the meantime, we can't work ourselves towards a place where we can be ready to be open and transparent and vulnerable and honest in a therapy room. And it also doesn't mean that if therapy is never available to us, we're never going to be able to get better. I have what I am convinced is the best therapist who is currently out there practicing therapy. And yet, if you told me I could only have either my therapist or the next 3 things that I'm going to recommend in this video, I would pick the 3 things in this video. Because the things in this video are what sustains mental health. Yes, there's an element to healing within therapy, but the work that you do outside of it is what really matters on a day-to-day basis. So today, we're going to talk about what kind of things you can do outside of the therapy room, even if you're never inside of it, in order to start working on your mental health in a proactive way. So last thing I'm going to say before we get started is I want to read you guys a quote from Pete Walker, who I, at this point, just bring up once a YouTube video. He specializes in complex PTSD, and he wrote about his own therapy journey in a way that I found incredibly relatable, and I think some of you guys might too, especially if you either have an avoidant element to your attachment style, or if you have complex PTSD or any other condition that can cause you to mistrust authority figures and adults. He wrote in his book, "It was not until later in life, after I had quite a few years of group and individual therapy, that I realized my journey of recovering had actually begun decades before my formal therapy. It began with all the therapeutic reading and writing I had instinctively gravitated toward. I unconsciously sought the help of others in the many spiritual and psychological self-help books that I was intuitively drawn to. Without really understanding it, I gained valuable insights about how to improve the way I treated myself and others. Just as importantly, I subliminally realized that there were a number of good, safe, wise, and helpful adults out there who could be trusted and who had a great deal of wise and kind guidance to offer. Over time, the authors in my community of books seemed like a small tribe of elders who I imagined as people who would have empathy for me if I were to meet them. Eventually, when I achieved something of a critical mass of this awareness, I managed to take a frightening leap into the water of therapy. I lucked out and got a good enough therapist to help me take steps in my healing that I could not manage on my own." So if you are in this place that Pete Walker is talking about here, and this is a place I have very much been in my life, it might take you a lot of time, a lot of external resources, a lot of self-work to get to the place where you're able to have faith and trust in the competence of others and the willingness of others to help you. And it's okay to take your time on that journey. In the meantime, or if that's never possible, let's talk about what you can do. Piece of advice number 1 is read everything you can get your hands on. get a library card, go to your local library and see how many books you can find on the topic that you are struggling with. So whether that's attachment style, trauma, specific symptoms you might be facing like substance abuse or eating disorders, or challenges in your relationship, find every resource you can find on that challenge and load up your brain with the information. If you can, read a lot of different things on each topic because you're going to get radically different perspectives. Some will resonate and some will not. Now, I want to acknowledge that a lot of people who grew up with trauma of any sort, with attachment wounds of any sort, with complex PTSD or other disorders that really impacted your development, you might have trouble with attention and keeping yourself physiologically calm and stable enough to be able to take in wide amounts of information. And if that's you, I really recommend trying audiobooks for reading. So when I personally am feeling dysregulated and I find it's hard to hold my attention on a book, I will go for a walk and listen to audiobooks, and that'll often help the information kind of seep into my brain in a different medium that I find a lot more soothing. And I found that this works for a lot of people who struggle with inattention for whatever reason. So there is an app you can get called Libby if you're in North America. I don't know if it works elsewhere, but it allows you to rent out audiobooks from the library like you would any book. And you can put it on 2x speed. I was reading the other day that people who listen to podcasts, audiobooks, anything like that faster actually retain more information because it forces you to concentrate harder. So a book that might take you like a week to read, you could get done in a 2-hour walk if you're listening to it on 2x speed and the book isn't that long. So it's a really great way to consume a lot of information about the challenges that you're facing really quickly. And whether or not you're in therapy, reading a ton of supplemental material, if you can, is just a fantastic thing to do because you have like the greatest minds on the planet, the most brilliant psychologists who have ever walked the face of the earth have condensed their thoughts after like 50 years of studying and researching and working with clients into a book that you can read in one afternoon if you want to. And people are not taking advantage of this. It's insane. Like, I have learned more from books in my life than absolutely anything else. Any relationship I've ever had, any therapy I've ever done, any self-development seminar or situation I've ever put myself in. No, books have taught me more than anything. Period, point blank. Everything else is like microdosing on knowledge and healing work. Books are just such a rich and concentrated resource, and the more you read, the more you understand about your own mind, the more you can start recognizing your own patterning, and then the more you're able to start catching yourself in those patterns and finding ways to break them. Now, finding the right books is a whole other adventure. At the end of this year, I am going to make a roundup of the 10 best books that I read this year, but I always end up throwing like 15 of them in there. And a lot of them were attachment or healing focused. So if you're looking for some recommendations, watch out for that video later this month. But I really believe with just going with your gut with books. Your brain kind of knows what you need. So if you're finding yourself drawn to a particular book, go with that. It probably has some answer that you're looking for. Okay, piece of advice number 2, you've probably heard this 1,000 times, but I cannot emphasize it enough. Exercise. Daily exercise, preferably getting outside to exercise if you can, because you also need vitamin D from the sun. And this is one of those pieces of advice where we all know it, we've all read the studies on how effective exercise is on mental health, but we're all very quick to forget it, myself included. So this fall, I went on a giant hiking trip, came home, started school, and basically did not leave my apartment for like 2 weeks because I was just exhausted from doing school and work full time, and I became extremely depressed within the course of like 2 weeks. Just because I had stopped exercising daily and I'd stopped going outside daily. And those two things had such a profound impact on my mental health within such a short period of time that I cannot imagine what doing that for like 4 months would look like. There's a book called The Upward Spiral by Alex Korb, which I really recommend, by the way. If you cannot afford therapy, if you're not able to go to therapy, but you're feeling depressed or anxious and you need some resources for working through what you can do on a day-to-day basis to help you kind of balance out your mental health, The Upward Spiral is a wonderful book that talks about tiny habits and little things you can do in your life to start combating depression. And they give a wonderful, detailed overview of exactly what SSRIs do to your brain and exactly what exercise and being outside does to your brain. And there are many similarities between the effects of those two things. And I think that exercise is one that people find really intimidating because a lot of us have this kind of all or nothing attitude about exercise, right? Like we think I have to be at the gym for 3 hours a day bodybuilding, or I have to be doing no exercise. And the reason we think of it that way is because we have forgotten that the point of exercise is not to get buff and look a certain way. It is literally just that our bodies were designed for movement. And if we don't give our bodies that movement, it's going to start impacting our mental health. I remember hearing about a conversation that a friend of mine had with a therapist one time, and this therapist had been practicing for 40 years, and my friend asked this therapist, if you were to give only one piece of advice to people, what would it be? And the therapist said, go for a walk every single day. That will have more of an impact on your mental health over the course of your life than you could possibly imagine. And she was like, if I only had 5 minutes with every client, that is the number one piece of advice I would give them. Go for a walk every day. Now, this obviously is not meant to minimize the fact that you might have very major mental health issues going on that a walk will not fix. This is not a fix for your mental health, but this is about elevating your brain to the level where it's able to cope with the other things a little bit better. And movement and feeling in tune with your body is a massive component of that, okay? Massive. Piece of advice number 3, if therapy is inaccessible to you for whatever reason, is join a 12-step support group. So, I cannot believe that I did not know for 28 years of my life that 12-step groups were not just for alcohol and drug abuse. They have 12-step groups for everything. I'm actually going to go online and read you a list of all of the 12-step groups that they have. Here we go. Alcoholics Anonymous, everyone knows about that one. Adult Children of Alcoholics, for those who are raised in alcoholic and other dysfunctional families. Fantastic resource. I highly recommend that one. If you grew up in any sort of family dysfunction, it does not have to be an alcoholic family whatsoever. It can be a family where alcohol was never used at all. But that program in particular deals with reparenting. It talks about the family roles. It is such a good resource. I cannot recommend it enough. Al-Anon/Al-Anon Teen for friends and families of alcoholics. Cocaine Anonymous, Clutterers Anonymous, Crystal Meth Anonymous, Co-Anon for friends and family of cocaine addicts. Codependence Anonymous, another fantastic resource for anyone dealing with any sort of interpersonal trauma, so attachment wounding in particular. COSA, a friends and family group associated with Sex Addicts Anonymous. Debtors Anonymous, Emotions Anonymous for recovery from mental and emotional illness. Eating Disorders Anonymous, Families Anonymous for relatives and friends of addicts. Food Addicts in Recovery Anonymous, Food Addicts Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, Heroin Anonymous, Love Addicts Anonymous, Marijuana Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Neurotics Anonymous for recovery from mental and emotional illness of any sort, Nicotine Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, Obsessive Skin Pickers Anonymous, Pills Anonymous for recovery from prescription pill addiction, Racists Anonymous, Sexaholics Anonymous, Sex Addicts Anonymous, Sexual Compulsives Anonymous, Survivors of Incest Anonymous, Sex and Love Addict Anonymous, Sexual Recovery Anonymous, Under Earners Anonymous, Workaholics Anonymous. So there is a 12-step group out there for almost any issue that you could possibly be facing. And at this point in time, almost all of them are online, so you can tune in from anywhere. They are completely free, and they provide you with both a structure for working through the program. They give you 12 steps to work through over the course of a year or however long it takes you. They provide you with a community of people you can work with. And they give you an open space to practice sharing with other people and showing up honestly in relationships, maybe for the first time. A lot of people are turned off from 12-step programs because they think that it means you have to give your life over to Jesus. And if you are an atheist or if you are someone who has struggled with religious abuse of any sort, that can feel very intimidating. I can guarantee you, as someone who has gone to many of these groups, that you absolutely do not ever have to accept any particular theology at all. You do not have to start believing in God. I have worked through many of the higher power related steps, and I do not believe in a Christian God. And while you certainly can have 12-step groups that are unhealthy, I don't want to discount the fact that not every group functions the same way, and you might end up in the wrong group. The brilliance of the internet and the brilliance of so many of these meetings being online now is that you can try out different groups to figure out what fits for you. So you can go online and you can even search for specialized groups. So 12-step groups that are focused on the issue that you want to focus on, but that are comprised of completely atheists, or groups that are women only, or men only, or non-binary only. So there is an incredible amount of selection you can do here in finding a group. And I really recommend, if these are groups that you want to start taking advantage of, you do go to like 5 or 6 meetings and figure out which group you jive with the best, because it's really important. But again, that resource is completely free. It gives you a community, it gives you a structure for working through whatever problem you're working through, and it gives you so much support along the way. So even if you can afford therapy, I always recommend that if you're looking for a little bit of extra support and you're looking for community to help you work through these problems, 12-step groups can be phenomenal resources for that. In an ideal world, you would combine all of these things with therapy, and that's how you get massive results. But do not despair if therapy does not work for you, if you cannot find a therapist, if you cannot afford a therapist. There are so many routes to getting better. And I truly believe from the bottom of my heart that if you are truly down to your core motivated to get better, nothing will stop you. There is so much out there that you can find and learn from. Even just looking at YouTube videos, there are so many amazing psychologists, self-help professionals out there who have massive libraries of free material on YouTube. And I have learned so much that way personally. You can also take online courses. A lot of them are the cost of one therapy session, but they have condensed someone's entire knowledge base and experience into a course that you can take sometimes over a couple of hours. And that's also something that I have personally hugely benefited from in my own healing process. When I started working on my attachment style, I only took courses and watched YouTube videos for the longest time. And then I started reading every book on earth, and then I decided to take a master's in attachment theory, so it kind of snowballed, but it started with a couple of YouTube videos on the topic. Last thing I want to note, if you recognize that you have problems that you want to work through, but you're coming up against some sort of internal resistance, there can actually be parts of our psychology that try to block us from getting better because we think that if we get better, maybe we're going to lose a relationship, maybe we're going to stop getting help that we need. There can be mental barriers around getting better for people. And if that's the case for you, I really recommend the book How We Change and 10 Reasons Why We Don't by Ross Ellenhorn. It really helped me bust through a kind of wall in my own mind when I hit a point where I was recognizing that particularly in relationships, I, in theory, wanted to get better, but in practice wasn't actually doing the hard work of doing it, and I couldn't figure out why. So sometimes even just contextualizing where our resistance lies around changing can be really helpful and help us kind of clear the way to start doing more honest work. Okay, that's all I have to say for today. Again, I'm gonna make a follow-up video coming soon about how to find a good therapist if that is the next step for you. But in the meantime, if you guys have any awesome books, videos, resources that you have found that have helped you immensely in your own healing journey, please drop them in the comments. I would love for us to share resources because I have learned so much personally through resources that other people have shared with me. So please share anything that you think might be relevant, and let's help each other get as much of the free help as we possibly can, because it is a hard world out there and we need each other's help to get through it. Okay, I love you guys. I hope you're taking care of yourselves, and I will see you back here again soon.